Good evening and welcome back to another episode of Minds on Guard, where we are learning how to guard our minds against all of the manipulations, tactics, and all the forces that play on our minds, our behaviors, our thinking processes day to day throughout the 21st century. In our last video, we began discussing a man who has had a tremendous amount of influence over our lives in America. And really throughout the world. Edward Bernays was responsible for shaping our current media landscape and in many ways pioneered the tactics that are employed at all levels of society where any amount of influence over others is being sought. Over the next series of videos, we're going to examine just who Edward Bernays was, the things he thought and took part in, and the impact that his ideas and various projects have had on our culture. There is quite a lot to discuss, and I know this will be an eye-opening journey which should reveal the many and varied ways in which our minds have been subject to manipulation and attack over many decades. As we spoke about last time, Edward Bernays was the nephew of one of the most influential thinkers of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Sigmund Freud. According to biographers of Bernays, he was known to spend time with his uncle in the Swiss Alps, where he developed a fascination and a depth of understanding regarding Freud's ideas that delved into the human mind, our subconscious and our unconscious desires, and much, much more. Bernays would take long walks with his uncle where they would discuss research and concepts that would eventually become the foundation for what Edward would later go on to make a fortune in during his career, and using his concepts to aid big business, government, and ultimately shift social consciousness in ways which left such a deep mark on society that it would never be the same again. Freud had come to the conclusion that there is, lurking within all humans, a deeply repressed aggression and sexual desire which drives all of our choices, our thinking, and our behavior. The outbreak of World War I helped to confirm in Freud's mind that his findings were indeed true. There had never been, in history up to that point, a conflict so horrific, so wide-reaching, and the brutality of the war was a stark piece of evidence for Freud. He became incredibly disillusioned by what transpired and wrote much on the subject of man's insatiable desire for violence and war, essentially stating that it is to be expected that we would behave in this manner. This irrationality is what Bernays would ultimately take and run with in his exploits during his long career. Reasoning from the idea that humans are basically irrational and motivated exclusively by our subconscious desires, Bernays was the first person to transpose that idea into the corporate world and establish a new way of marketing products to the masses. He did not work exclusively in the corporate business world, and as we'll see, much of his most influential and groundbreaking work would be done in the political arenas. But this would actually translate extremely effectively into the world of products and marketing. So let's dig in a little bit deeper and see just what he was able to accomplish. Prior to Edward Bernays and his integration of his uncle's ideas onto the masses, American society was operating as a needs-based culture, economically and socially speaking. This went right in line with the pragmatism of the time. People did not buy or use things that were not meant for a specific purpose or provide some form of utility in the home or work life. Now, this is an important fact to keep in mind as we examine the progression of Bernays' work so that we can attempt to track the deep-level shifts that were caused by what he did. He was heavily involved in the public messaging surrounding the U.S. involvement in World War I. This type of public messaging became known as propaganda, and it was Bernays who may be credited with coining that term as it's used today. In his book titled Propaganda, the first paragraph reads, "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country." Once again, it's going to be helpful to hold on to this quote in our minds throughout our discussion of Bernays and all that he did. As we discussed in prior videos, President Woodrow Wilson was deeply focused on attempting to pursue a foreign policy of global democracy and opening up the world to a more integrated form of global economic and government relationships. Wilson had tasked many prominent business and legal minds of the day to carry out these plans, and Bernays was integral to this effort. He, along with President Wilson, attended the Paris Peace Conference, which would be the inception point of think tanks like the Council on Foreign Relations. According to Bernays, the purpose of their presence at the conference was to work towards making the world safe for democracy. As such, the propaganda tactics were to be employed in full force in order to attempt to sway the minds of the masses of Europe into aligning with their desires with those of the propagandists. This may be thought of as a quick illustration of the ways in which thought manipulation continues to work today. During his time in Paris, Bernays saw the power of his ideas of appealing to the masses via their subconscious emotional responses. People flocked to Wilson while he was there as if he was some kind of hero, there to save them from the tyranny and destruction that had ravaged their countries during the war. Wartime was and is a terribly difficult time for any country, and this plays out in the public's social behavior in the most tangible of ways when the masses are examined. Think of the public opinion in the U.S. just after September 11th. The entire country rallied to a cause and was driven by the emotional effect of the tragedy that happened. In the same way, the people of Europe were looking for any answer they could find to sort of deal with the devastation that they were enduring at the time. Now that this was clear to Bernays, he wondered if the same kinds of effects could be seen on the masses if the concepts of the propagandists were employed during peacetime. One initial problem with bringing these ideas back to America and then implementing them on the public came with the term propaganda itself. The effects of the ideas were clear and as such were adopted very quickly by other groups seeking to exert the same kind of mass-scale control over large groups of people. It would be the regimes in Germany who would take this word and the concept to heights not quite seen yet. Due to the nature of their propaganda and the resulting effects, the word took on a very bad connotation here in America. So, in order for Bernays to continue his work, he set up shop in New York under a new banner, the Council on Public Relations. Not to be confused with the CFR, the Public Relations Council was aiming to use the ideas developed by Bernays to sway large groups of people into thinking and behaving in ways that aligned with the agendas of government and big business. Now, the CFR certainly uses propaganda tactics to achieve their aims, but it's important to recognize that the two groups are distinct from one another. It was at this time where Bernays really began to take his uncle's work regarding the subconscious emotional desires of people and drive it into the mass-scale implementation. He would do this through experimentation on the populace. One such experiment was centered around the tobacco industry and the social evolution with respect to the relationship between men and women in modern life. Bernays was contacted by the president of the American Tobacco Corporation, George Hill, and he was tasked with the effort of gaining a larger foothold in the market by breaking the taboo surrounding women and smoking. Bernays decided that it would be beneficial to investigate, through the field of psychoanalysis, exactly what cigarettes meant to women. By targeting the deeper sexual drivers within women and men, the decided route would be to find a way to give women an avenue to challenge what was seen as an imbalanced level of power invoked upon women by the male section of the populace. Dr. A. Brill, a leading psychoanalyst of the time, aided Bernays by likening cigarettes to a phallic symbol. Brill said that if Bernays could convince women that smoking would provide them with the sense of their own sexual power over men through a public display of their own sort of phallic symbol, then they would be more likely to adopt the habit in their daily lives, thus providing the market share that was being sought by the tobacco industry. With this advice in hand, Bernays organized a demonstration to be enacted at the annual Easter Day Parade in New York City. He persuaded a group of rich debutantes, or young women, to hide cigarettes under their clothes. They were then instructed to join the parade and at a given signal, pull out their cigarettes and light them up for all of the gathered thousands to see. With this plan in place, Bernays himself tipped off the press that he was aware of a group of suffragettes who were planning to protest the male-dominated society by lighting up what they were calling torches of freedom. This little stroke of manipulative genius would guarantee that anyone who supported the idea of equality in society would have to support the stunt or risk being seen as someone who was set against one of the core principles of the American way of life, that being the right to freedom. The phrase immediately would bring to mind the image of Lady Liberty and her torch, guiding all of those people seeking a better and freer way of life in the land of opportunity here in America. This was a powerful image being painted through the action and the phrase, the combination of those two things. Due to Bernays informing the press of all of this, all of the photographers in attendance were ready to capture the moment that these women lit up their cigarettes. The next day, every major newspaper in the country ran the photos and the phrase together. The emotional manipulation through subtle targeting of the subconscious proved successful in the aim of getting women to smoke. The use of cigarettes by women was no longer seen as taboo, and in fact was shifted to a way that they might take control of their individuality and place themselves on an equal footing with men in terms of their power within society. Sales grew, and Bernays proved his ideas could be used to great effect when applied to efforts of shifting public opinion and behavior. What sorts of things does this make you think of when you consider the media in today's world? Can you think of any parallels present in the media today that might have a connection to the Torches of Freedom stunt that Bernays pulled off? Please leave a comment and let's discuss how this tactic has evolved over time. In the coming videos, we'll examine more of Edward Bernays and his long and storied career. Until then, stay diligent and stay vigilant, always keeping your minds on guard.